So thanks for showing up today. Beautiful day. You could be out there playing frisbee and doing all that stuff. And thank you for the introduction, Shaw. I'd like to, first of all, thank Shaw and the college for inviting me to come here. It's really a huge honor for an artist to get a chance to present their case, in a way. I mean, a lot of us fall on that old trope of my work speaks for itself kind of thing. And, you know, of course, you'll always hope that your work engages people all by itself without anybody explaining it, without you explaining it yourself. But that said, sometimes it's really useful to get some insights into the work of an artist from someone who was there at the making. And so that's why we're here. Okay, so Shaw told you that essentially I'm a landscape painter, and while that's somewhat true, it's not totally the case. I started out, what I did here is I put together a couple of presentations to show you, one which kind of goes through work from the last 30 years, showing you a whole bunch of different bodies of work, small segments of different bodies of work, to kind of show you how I've allowed myself to explore across media, across subject matter, things which kind of I wanted to focus on, and then what that segued into. And it doesn't always seem like the most logical segue, and I think that's an important thing for us to see. If I had to synopsize what has been of interest to me, it's been people, places, and things. That said, you know, I paint paintings which contain images usually, but more and more over the years I really have come to think of the work that I make as essentially abstract work, which happens to come together to remind us of things and people and places. What I mean by that, just, you know, if you're sort of in the beginning stages of figuring out how to make paintings and drawings and things, if you're not quite sure exactly why you want to do it, I enjoy the process of painting. I like to get my hands covered with ink and slide around on a surface of copper. I like, you know, I like scraping, abrading color, and watch what happens when that happens. And that's not always, the joy and the pleasure in doing that isn't always because it's making an image appear. A lot of times it's just because it's an act which is very enjoyable. And I happen to then direct that act into image making. So to show you, like at the beginning, 30 years ago, I was working on primarily figurative work, primarily what we would refer to as realist work, but also work which I wanted to kind of imbue these images with a certain kind of romantic quality. So I was working on things like tracing paper. This is an acrylic paint and ink wash and pencil drawing on tracing paper. It's a self-portrait. And these next few quick ones are just straightforward pencil drawings of people sitting there in front of me. My interest in these too was in actually, of course I wanted them to show up on the page. I wanted the subjects to show up on the page, but I really loved that I could give this quality of sort of softness, or this quality of rigidity, or this quality of flesh, simply by using pencils. These are pencil drawings, so it's just graphite pencils, powdered graphite. I'm working on Bristol board and using erasers and using brushes and lighter fluid. I used to use lighter fluid to move the graphite around because it kind of is a solvent which can dissolve the waxes that are used in the various hardnesses of pencils to make almost like a wash feeling, and then it evaporates, and then you can just erase right into it all the way back to the white of the page. So, and I was kind of, I was on my own doing these things, so I didn't really know what I was doing. So it's very much an experimental process of figuring out how can I get pencils to do some of the things I think I want them to do. If you look at them really closely, you can start to read the pencil marks, sort of like the way Chuck Close, if you look at a Chuck Close print, or drawing or painting, he really wants you to see his process. He wants you to recognize the organizing principle of the grid. He wants you to recognize that he is making marks, he is putting down dabs of paint, or he is using parallel lines, or whatever it is that he's using. There's no disguising it. I really respect that, and I want that also to show up in the work that I make. So, a huge shift from these paintings, or these drawings, which were relatively, structured, to painting, which is much more liquid, really wanting the liquid to show up. This is a self-portrait as the Queen of Cyprus. Basically, this is a riff off a painting by Hans Holbein of the Queen of Cyprus. Holbein was a painter who was painting at the time of Henry VIII, so it's a long time ago, 400 years ago. And I did this whole series of drawings, paintings, prints, and photographs of myself as these historical characters. This is just one of them. And I crossed over lots stylistically in lots of ways. This painting happens to be really splashy and rich and all that stuff because at the time I was really interested in the American painter Richard Diebenkorn. So you take a Hans Holbein and you take a Richard Diebenkorn and you mash them together with a 24-year-old kid who's just interested in all this stuff, which is what I was at the time. And you come up with something that's a hybrid, that's neither nor. This is on wood, so it had the advantage for me, rather than being on a stretched canvas, the wood doesn't move at all, so you put the paint on there and you can just scratch through it and get down to the wood. You can even take a carving knife and carve into the surface of the wood and essentially make a wood block. So it had all kinds of potential for being a physical act, equally with being an imagistic act. So right after that, funnily enough, I moved to Cyprus, and where I was not made queen. But I got married, and my wife and I had an opportunity to spend a little bit of time in Cyprus on our honeymoon, and it ended up we stayed there for almost a year and a half. And while I was there, all the work that I had been doing prior to that, I tried to continue it, and it just felt a little bit silly being in this, we're living in this little stone hut in this amazing landscape. So I started doing watercolor paintings of the land, and then I got some oil paint and bought a little traveling easel and just walked out into the land and started painting en plein air, which I had never done. And Shaw sort of alluded to this when she said, it's a difficult subject for a contemporary painter to embrace because it has not that it's not possible to make really terrific work with that as subject, but it has been done so much, and it has the potential to be so saccharine and so, dismissible. You can say, BFD, I've seen a million landscape paintings. So the task is to make a painting which engages the viewer, meaning me, on a level which is deep enough that it really kind of doesn't matter what the subject is because the painting engages you. So I started painting the land in Cyprus, and because I had been in this, working in this mode of, relative depictive work in the figures, I started off, just looking and painting, and trying to capture what I was seeing. And I didn't really work with paint when I was in graduate school. I worked with drawing, so I was teaching myself to paint too. So these are just some examples from that time. And then I spent a couple years in Jordan. Unfortunately, I don't have any images from that time right now on this presentation. So I spent close to 4 years out of the country and I moved back to the United States and to Portland. And just because, you know, where should we go? I don't know. Where do you want to go? I don't know. Where do you want to go? You know, kind of thing. We came out to Portland and ran out of money and got stuck there. And so I just started to make a life there. And that notion of in Cyprus where I could just walk out the back door and I would be in the land was really instrumental in keeping me focused on making that work. When I got to Oregon, I found that if I wanted to continue that work, I had to get in my car and drive to find those places which made me, you know, want to paint them. And so I found some places that, near Portland. There's a really remarkable island called Sylvia Island, which is 10 miles outside of the downtown Portland. And I've spent years and years, and I still go there. I've spent years going there and looking at that place and painting, again, en plein air. But also gradually working from drawings, working from photographs, working from memory, adjusting scale, all that stuff. So I was disappointed in the fact that I had to get in a car and drive. So I just decided to work a little bit closer to home. And my studio at the time was just the living room of the house that we were living in. It was a 800 square foot home, you know, and I took over half of it as a studio. The marriage didn't last, by the way. Go figure. So I would look out the back kitchen window, and this is what I saw, and this is what I painted. Or I would look out the back window of the bedroom, and this is what I saw, and this is what I painted. So this painting is 60 inches by 70 inches. The last one was 18 inches by 18 inches. So you can see exploring scale, being inside in a studio allowed me to adjust what I could do potentially. So instead of something I was able to carry under my arm into the field with my easel also, this is too big for that to happen for me. So I was able to start working on a larger scale. And I started working with images in the neighborhood, outside the window, down the street, that kind of stuff. All of these are that 60 by 70 inch range. And then gradually, I stopped even looking out the window and started looking around the rooms in the home and the bathroom. So this is just, this is a monotype as opposed to a painting. In 1989, I got introduced to this method, this medium of monotype printing, which is a unique printing process. You don't addition anything. You guys know what this is probably. So I was invited to come make some lithographs at the Stone Press Editions in Seattle. And while I was there, I was working on 2 large lithographs, each of which had 11 plates, very engaged work. And the printers, the guys that were actually doing the physical work of printing things, were really overwhelmed by the work that brought on. And so John Lysak, who was the head master printer at that time, he suggested I get out of their way and go make some monotypes and leave them alone. And I didn't even know what he was talking about. So he showed me a couple of things, you know, like you put the ink on the plate here, put a piece of paper on it, run it through the press, and now leave us alone. And so for 4 days I was up there just doing that, and I just fell in love with it. I ended up buying my own press, having it at home, and it's been a huge other direction in the work for what I do. Excuse me. It's truly a painter's medium. It's very much it allows one to really work through thoughts quickly but fluidly. So just, you know, going into the basement, going into the attic, looking into the bathroom, standing on the sidewalk looking at your front porch, painting the chairs in the studio. At this time, I'm, you know, setting things up and painting them from observation. I'm also making drawings and ink wash drawings from observation. And then I started using my camera too and taking photographs of those things. And at first I thought I wanted to make photographs, but I realized I was finding another method of sketching without actually sketching. So I started using some of those photographs as the basis for paintings. You know, the stove in the morning making your tea. So here are some examples of just an ink wash drawing. Again, you know, my ex-wife used to complain about the smell of the turpentine. I work with I'm oil painting. I don't use acrylic paint in the work that I make. So I use oil paint, I use turpentine and Damar varnish and stand oil and all very traditional materials. And I like that, I like them. In fact, I teach painting a lot, and none of the institutions where I teach allow turpentine in the buildings. It is so fucking frustrating because it's not the same thing, you know? So you feel like you're kind of teaching half what you know. So I talk about painting, I talk about the stuff you can do, and I give them these secret formulas that they can do on their own outside of class. So at one point, I just, I can't remember why this happened. I think we took a trip and were gone for a month, and I came back. And sometimes when you break the rhythm of work, the rhythm is broken and you just are not picking it back up again where you left off, even if you want to. And so what I do is I just change directions. And so I just bought a pack of BFK, large size, the 30 by 40 printing paper, and a box of charcoal and some erasers, and started getting naked in the living room and drawing myself in the mirror. And I found out what I was doing was responding to some reading that I was doing on Dante Alighieri's Inferno. And I was so intrigued to read those because of two artists' work who had illustrated the Inferno. One was Robert Rauschenberg, who was is a significant American artist of the 20th century, and Sandro Botticelli, who was an Italian artist from 16th century, I don't know, 15th, I can't remember, a long time ago. And those two artists used the same text illustrated the same text in hugely different ways. And as I was reading these and as doing these drawings, while I didn't start off thinking that that's what I was doing, I came to the realization that is what I was doing. I was trying to find imagery which would help to illustrate the stories that I was reading, and also pay some kind of homage to these two artists who are so significant. So these drawings are pretty large, you know, they are completely observed drawings, or what I would do would be just lay down on the paper and trace out myself with the charcoal and then put it up on the wall, and then look in a mirror and start, you know, looking at structure of light. I have a pretty significant history of working, studying anatomy, dissecting the cadaver and all that stuff, so I kind of know the body pretty well. So a lot of it is invented simply from knowing what I'm expecting to see, but a lot of it also is observing, you know, in the mirror, and then observing the drawing. I mean, this particular drawing, it got this really great kind of eerie quality. I don't know if it comes across in there, because once the drawing was done, I took the vacuum cleaner and vacuumed off all the extra charcoal, so it became this ghost of a drawing, and then went back in and very kind of quietly and deliberately put in some things which brought it together. And that led to another body of work, which is also figurative, but which was less about what we as humans look like and more about what we as humans contain within us. It was a body of about 140 monotypes that are collectively known as animus. And the animus images are this hybrid form of human and animal characteristics these sort of sometimes tender, sometimes aggressive, sometimes afraid. All of these are small images. They're about 6 by 9 inches around there. And they were made with a very simple process of, I had 2 plates that were identical in size. One I would ink up with black lithographic ink, oil-based lithographic ink, and one I would ink up with white lithographic ink. And I would wipe away into the black field and in a reductive process find the image by wiping away. If you've ever done monotype, you kind of know by removing the ink, you reveal the surface of the paper, so you create the white in a reductive way. So I would do that, find the image I wanted to see, print it, open up the press again, and then just print the white field on top of that print. And then I'd open it up again, and the white field would then have a bunch of black ink from the plate for the first plate, transferred from the print to the plate, and then I would manipulate that a little bit and print that again. And then, so one image generated another image, just through the process of, by changing out the paper or changing out the plates. And in that way, I got to be surprised. So rather than this sort of divergent approach where I want to make an image that looks kind of like this, these were approached much more convergently, where I don't know what I want to do, but I want to, but these are my rules. And following the rules, that's what I end up with, I knew I wanted to work figuratively, and I knew I was looking for some connection to that inner. And they're completely invented things, so the process would be to ink up the black plate and then just throw a rag on there and kind of move it around and look and see what I got and what it started to suggest, looking at clouds, what do you see, and then maybe pushing it this way, pushing it that way. But there's no reference that they're based on other than what's going on in the mind. That group of work got interrupted, and I picked up a little while later, the same notion of kind of discovering the imagery by inking up the plate black and then wiping away. And I ended up with 2 bodies of work, one which is collectively called Days of Love, which is images of men and women and men and men and women and men and men and themselves and all this stuff. Essentially communing with one another or by themselves, revealing themselves as kind of vulnerable people, as sexual people, as intimate people. So, it's not erotic art, in my opinion. That's not what it's about. But frequently, they are about 2 people engaged in some kind of communion. And again, these are just invented. They're not based on any other images. So they kind of relies on the fact that I practiced a lot of figure drawing. I studied it a lot. And you live a life, you draw on your memory too. You draw on, for me, it's really critical that I'm not outside of the imagery, that they're reflective of experience. They sort of talk about what it is to be alive and to be in relationship, even ones that fail. These are a little bit larger than those animus prints too. They're not as big as this. They're about 10 by 13 or 11 by 13 inches is the plate. One thing that really characterized them, though, is this kind of enveloping darkness. So it was really critical in this work. The ink that I was using was this lithographic ink. It's made in France. It's Charbonnel is the brand. And they make this ink called Noir Velours, which is a velvet black. You can't buy it in this country anymore for some reason. I don't know why. They won't allow it to be imported. Maybe it has some toxic stuff to it. But that particular ink created, for me, this, this arena that no other inks seem to suggest. And by that I mean there was a hole in the paper as opposed to ink on the surface of the paper. And that's really critical for me to the success of the work. And it's evident that in that space that's kind of carved out in there, the figures obviously are illuminated somehow, but there's usually some egress to the space. There's some way to leave. It's not always easy to get there. So in this image, you can see on the two left and right side, there's just these little exit places, or here the doorway or window or whatever that is. This one has none, but that one has that little place at the upper right-hand corner, which doesn't explain the light on the figures, but it does sort of allow for the possibility that there is seclusion, you know what I mean? Because there's also the possibility for leaving. So I'm not exactly sure why this happened, but I was working on paper, you know, doing all these prints, and I've made my living as an artist for a long time now, and I'm always at the mercy of the vagaries of the economy, and you know, oil paint is very expensive. The paint I use very good quality paint, so you know, an average tube is more than 20 bucks, often 50 bucks, and so every once in a while, I reduce the scale. I create rules for myself to create an economy of means. You know, I look at my paint box and see what I have and say, okay, all the paintings I make are going to be based on this, 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 and this, because I have them and I can't afford to buy more. So I find it very useful to make some rules. And it's also a good strategy when you don't have ideas. Make up a couple of rules and follow them, and then the ideas follow. So I got into the habit of driving and with my camera, and at the time, this was before we had any digital cameras or anything like this, so still working with slide film. I would be driving, and as I'm driving, kind of shooting my camera out the window and just sort of grabbing haphazardly some sense of that stuff that was happening on the periphery. I mean, I was being mostly responsible while I was driving and looking at the road. So I wasn't looking through the camera or trying to compose within the viewfinder or anything like that. Simply allowing myself to accidentally capture places and images. And then I get back to the studio, and because I was shooting slide film, I would start to sandwich some of these slides together, 2 or 3 of them, and look at them in a little slide viewer. You guys probably don't even know what slides are anymore, but you know, maybe if you do, it's this little piece of film, you know? And so you sandwich them together and look at them in the light, and all of a sudden those 2 separate places create one kind of amalgamation of a place. And it's a place that doesn't exist in reality, but which presents itself to you, and is also a kind of the sum of the activity of seeing without really looking at. When I drive, and this is something I'm still working with, when I drive, I've noticed that, and I do a lot of driving, I've noticed that all this stuff that's on the side of the road is constantly kind of coming into my field of vision. And of course, being a responsible driver, going 70 miles an hour, I don't pay a lot of attention to it, but I see it. And you might look over for a half a second and then get back to the work of not crashing. So this body of work is the result of noticing that all this seeing happens without you really getting a chance to focus on it. It's a very different process from walking into a field in Cyprus and spending hours and hours looking and painting and looking, you know. They're connected, but they're not. And it also sort of started to me to signal an interest that I finally recognized. I had an interest in engaging with the technology of my day, You know, at that time it was just a camera. And then returning, you know, since these aren't made mechanically, these aren't made by any kind of technology other than my hand and the ink and using a press, then they get translated back into this more, you know, felt thing, this thing that's been touched. This one is a pretty good example of how you can kind of feel that there are two images happening in there overlaying one another. In addition to the monotypes, those were monotypes. In addition to the monotypes, I was making paintings in the same vein. So these are just some studio installation shots for you to see sort of how these works on paper. We're kind of constantly, you know, working on multiple things at a time, sometimes a dozen paintings at once. And strategizing layering. So, you know, if you're studying painting at all, you know about an imprimatura layer, you know about underpainting, you know about, you know, creating some kind of quality which will impact the painting but not be the predominating quality. And as I started to notice this, well, the connection to the camera and the reliance on getting places in the car and overlaying imagery, I started to mess around with what that meant I could do with paint. So this painting here ended up being, you can see that it has a very photographic quality to it, and it's made by painting the painting with a brush and paint and all that stuff, and then using a big lithographic roller and kind of rocking the painting until it kind of fuzzed out and became not in focus anymore. And then simply loading a brush up with some paint and making these marks just be chunks of paint that sit on the surface of the painting so that they actually become closer, they feel closer to us, they feel physical. The stuff that's out of focus feels far away. And it's all illusion, you know. It's all sort of a reminder of the way the camera has trained us to see space. And that it's very possible with paint to let it be paint and not, you know what I mean? In a single painting, create this amazing illusion of space, but also invite us to really just see it as paint. Because when you look at the painting, you could just as easily just see those blobs of paint on the front, these kind of swaths of color. And the red stuff at the bottom is the underpainting revealed, you know, so this is done on panel. So the underpainting is this sort of red. And then once that painting was done, or in the rocking process, I should say, all that paint is on the roller, so I happen to have another board that had been gessoed up and already had a field of blue on it, and I just transferred it from the roller onto that board. And this other painting happened, which has its own qualities. And you can see, if you look at the top, you can see the repeat from down here. It gets repeated up there because the roller was a certain diameter, it would only travel so far. This was a much bigger painting. And this painting just was a gift. I never touched it with any brush or any other way. And that led to this whole investigation of using the roller and brayers as a way of making paintings. Over the years, as a way of saving money, I never paid framers to frame anything, so I always had lots of mat board lying around that I used for cutting my own mats, lots of little spare bits and pieces. So, excuse me, I started painting on mat board and just using the rollers and brayers from one painting, and I'd be doing one body of work with brushes and all that stuff, and then just take my roller and remove some paint and transfer it to another surface in a different material. So that work with the rollers and the rocking and the getting out of focus, for some reason I came back to the figure, and I wanted to represent this concept of seeing without seeing, or how little information we really needed to feel the presence of a person's, energy. So I'd set up in my studio, I set up a white sheet and put a light behind it, and I had models come into the studio, and I would ask them, just to be, and when I needed them to stop, I'd yell stop. Sometimes I'd ask them to disrobe and get dressed again, and disrobe and get dressed again. A couple of times I had two people, and I just asked them to be there together, however they wanted to be, and just witnessed this. Used my camera to take pictures of it, or had my inks all worked out and just started to work on plates directly. So this resulted in a body of work that I collectively called Shades. I liked that reference back to Dante, as in when you read his writing about hell, talking about these souls, which are lost as shades. I just love the notion that there's this quality of this scrim between us and what really exists, and we get a sense of it because we have these shadows. And then there's also this notion of, how much do we really need to be considered present? You know what I mean? I haven't really spoken about it in those terms before, so I'm not sure if that was as clear as it is in my head. This is a little more literal, gives you an idea of what the setup. In the others, I really made the sheet very taut so that it was just a scrim. And in these, I moved the corners together so it became drapery. Again, at the time, I was considering that notion. I don't know, I was raised Catholic, so there's this whole story of Mary Magdalene and Veronica and wiping the face of Christ on the, carrying the cross and his image. And there's the Shroud of Turin, and there's all these things, this relationship of cloth and connections to something that's really enormous, something really important. I'm no longer a practicing Catholic, but I really love those notions that things which are relatively mundane can contain huge import for us if we are open to recognizing that. So these just sort of reveal the process. And they make me think of Veronica's veil then. I'll go through these pretty quick here. These are a small section from another large body of work called The River. And this was actually work which, it was no more than I wanted to do some work, and I thought, I want to do some work which has more than one panel in it. So why don't I do two panels? That's like twice the work. So I just have two pieces of copper and ink them both up, and I would do the work that I was going to do on one and put it aside, and do the work that I was going to do on the other and put it aside. And then I would just lay them on the press bed and put a sheet of paper and print it, and find out what those two things, how they spoke to one another. So rather than try and create a composition ahead of time and have it known a priori, I really wanted to find out what the story was in the accidental juxtaposition, So frequently I would have 4 or 5 or 6 plates going, and just print them and then print them and then ink it up again and print it again, and not even look at the prints as they came off the press. And I saw stories start to happen. I saw some things which, like in this one, this notion of this single figure on the right being isolated, and this group of figures on the left sort of communicating with one another, and this whole notion of I don't even know, separation and ostracizing and, you know, abandonment and, deep stuff like that. So right after I finished that body of work, I was offered an opportunity to spend some time in England for a year. So I went, my wife and I moved to England for a while, and I kept finding, well, I spent a lot of time going to museums and looking at art and going to galleries, and I got a gallery to represent me, and I did, all the things that I was supposed to do on a professional level. But then I would just walk around the city, and I kept finding photographs on the ground, like little passport photos or photo booth photos. And so I found, anybody see that movie Amelie? I mean, it was kind of like that. It was like they would just be there for some reason. And I started to collect them. And I made this whole body of work on images that I found on the streets in London. I did a residency at a place in Belgium where I got a chance to use the presses there and make some monotypes. I also made paintings, mezzotints, etchings. So I did, I don't know how many, 30 images of this guy, this unknown, I just call it unknown man, because I don't know who he was. And it was just some guy. It inspired me. And this person who was gender non-specific. So, this is 1980, no, this is 1995, I guess. And in England, I found this photograph and I could not tell, am I looking at a boy or a girl? Or am I looking at a young man or a young woman? And I loved that because, there was such an opportunity to simply respond to this thing and not force the images to become one or another, to not force anything to happen, to just let this image be it, itself. And then in a weird sort of way, this other image presented itself. Again, the same kind of really unclear who I'm seeing here. This print is called Happy Girl or Boy. It's just like, it was this very smiling person, young, like probably 12, something like that, and still becoming themselves. And I spent so much time in England looking at art in the museum there. There was one painting in particular by a guy named Anthony van Dyck. It was a portrait of Cornelius van der Geest. It was a life-size painting, but it was a small painting, about 16 by 20-ish. And so I decided I really wanted to figure that out, how he made that painting, because it was just drew me. Every time I would go there, I would just spend an hour in front of it. Very simple. So when I got back to the States in my studio, which again was back in my living room, I would just invite people to come sit, and I wanted to paint them and see if I could figure that out. And so this is my nephew, Sam, who's now an artist himself, graduated from California College of Art. But at the time, he was 12. And I would just ask people to come sit, and I would paint them. Friends, family, neighbors, myself. So these are harking back to direct observation from the subject as well. So no photographs involved, nothing. No mediation in there. It's really just me and the subject and the material. And one of the things that I find always happens for me in making the work is that the material itself is always a complete present being. So paint is important. It's not me being the boss of paint to make the thing that I want. It's me and paint holding hands and doing what we're going to do together. It sounds very anthropomorphic and all that, but it's really the truth for me when it's working, when it really works. I find that the materials themselves are an equal partner in what happens in the studio. And this process of painting people sitting there is really interesting because it takes time, and that's something that most of us are not used to spending much of anymore, focused on a thing. We're all used to, oh shit, when's the last time I checked my email? Or, you know, that kind of stuff. So it really, it requires a certain amount of attention, and not just on my part, but on my sitter's part. So what happens is, usually, it's because these aren't professional models, you know, they're not used to people really looking at them and scrutinizing them. Usually there's a certain period of being uncomfortable, even with people you love, you know, they're a little uncomfortable. And a lot of sort of this false face that gets presented, a lot of smiling. When you're looking at the painting, they go into their real face, and when you look back at them, they kind of smile. And then after a while, nobody can do that, and they start to reveal what's really present, you know, and you really start to see kind of further into your subject. So a lot of the paintings, well, I love to see that represented. A lot of sitters do not like to see that represented because they feel it reveals something that's a little bit too close to home or a little too personal, or you know what I mean? So I tend not to do these for commission because the few times I've done that, it's been like a disaster. I mean, I think I did this kick-ass painting, and I love it, and they're just like, that's not what I look like. I'm happier than that. You know, my nose isn't that big. You know what I mean? And you just say, well, it is a painting, right? And I am a painter. It's not you, right? So this guy, this is one of my best friends of all time, and Shay, he's sat for me a few times over the years. And this portrait is my sister, Monica, who at the time was in the last year of a 25-year career teaching elementary school, special education at elementary school, and she was fried. And it was the last week of summer vacation, and she came to sit for me to paint. And you could just see in her face, I mean, she looks at, when she saw this painting, she cried, you know, she thought, oh my God, you know, do I really look like that? And now she's no longer in that job, she's doing something she loves now. And she said, it's completely that quality of like, it's the end of vacation and I'm about to start school and I feel like this, you know, how's this gonna end up, you know? And you read that in this painting. So if you're not willing to make yourself look awkward, you know, how can you ask other people to? So I don't know why this happened, but I just started traveling again and getting out of the house. And I actually I do know about this. I was asked to go to France to make some paintings from the countryside around. Some friends of mine have a house there, and they said, you can stay at our house if you make some paintings and give us a painting. You can stay there for free. So my mom didn't raise stupid boys, so I thought, okay, we're gonna go to France for free. They even paid for the airplane ticket. So I just packed up my easel, and this was before 9/11, so I took my easel, a portable, you know, Julian easel. It's full of paint. It even has little bottles of turpentine and oil in it, and all my brushes and my painting knives, and the operative word. And carry it right into the cabin of the plane, and had no problem doing that. It was amazing. Now I kind of doubt that I could do that. But this is going back to plein air painting now. So like just walking out, or I rent a car and just drive out into the country where I was, and just set up and paint all day. Look around and paint. this is getting back into the studio now, and this is a few years later, and I find that I'm an expectant father, and I managed to get through that first marriage, and then this all of a sudden before the second marriage, I didn't know that was going to happen, but I did know I was going to become a dad, and at the tender age of 49, and I thought, wow, I didn't think it. I just started to respond. This is amazing. This is great. I noticed the paint started to change. The color started to change. Things became light, really active, frenetic, in fact. So I thank my daughter for all this next phase of painting, because anticipating her arrival sort of made this all happen. And this is a little bit more recently. This is 2009. That whole notion that the paint is your partner really starts to become more and more critical to me in the last 5 or 6 years, where there's no disguise. There's a lot of times there's passages of paint which have nothing to do with any kind of description of anything. They simply exist. And I'm asking them to exist in the same arena as other paint, which seems to be organized and trying to describe some kind of image. And I don't have an explanation for it. I mean, I'm not trying to say anything in particular with it. It truly is just an act of painting. And I changed studios, and I got a much larger studio, which kind of opened up the possibility that I could work on a particular scale. I had a big show coming up in 2009, and so I started working on these paintings, which were 5 by 10 feet. I mean, this whole body of work, these huge 60 by 120 inches. They're in panels, 2 panels, kind of harking back to those river monotypes. And the notion here was, again, that the 2 panels could relate to each other in this iteration, or you could just flip them and they could become a whole different painting, by the right becoming the left and the left becoming the right. And the paintings changed enormously. And so I did, 8 or 10 paintings on this scale for an exhibition at that time. And we had the opening, and the paintings, of course, the cost of the paintings went up astronomically because of the scale and all that stuff. And it was right as the market crashed. It was like literally the week that the market, all that shit hit the fan. So if anybody wants one of these paintings, you just come down to my studio. It just sort of changed what I was able to do. I felt so fortunate that I was able to do this body of work with all the hope and nonchalance that I was able to muster at the time, because that's not really possible right now. But what they did do was something broke. Some breakthrough happened internally, which is still going on in the work that I'm making right now. And it also, I ended up going to Oakland for a couple of years with my wife. Got a job down there teaching at Mills College. She is a dance artist, choreographer. And I went from my 1,000 square foot studio to the garage at this house in Oakland that was about 10 feet by 12 feet, something like that. But I wanted to paint big, so these are kind of frustration. So I wanted these last images, I kind of wanted you to see what's inspiring me right now in terms of, how I see what I see. I teach at Oregon State University 2 days a week, which means I drive 85 miles south in the morning and 85 miles north in the evening, all year long. And I use my phone now as I'm driving to just sort of do some of that stuff that I did with my camera 15 years before. And when I get home or into my studio, I just spit it into the computer and look at them and see what there is something that I'm interested in. And I start to notice that one of the things I'm interested in is structures that I never really noticed before, but they're really gorgeous, barns and buildings and places that humans touch. And it occurred to me that for years and years, except for when I actually am representing a human being, a monotype of people in the dark or a painting, when I'm representing the land, they are never populated. There's never a human being in them, and that's not a thing I decided I'm not going to do. It just never occurred to me. And in fact, I would edit things out. I would take out telephone poles and take out buildings and just not paint them, ignore them, forget they're there. And now, for some reason, they're all I can think about when I'm seeing the land. It's all I'm interested in. I start seeing them sculpturally. I think of them as these huge monoliths in the land. I see how they receive light. I see how they displace space. And then, gradually it's starting to occur to me, like anybody with a brain would have thought of this a long time ago, but it occurs to me that there are stories within those buildings. They're functional. They're occupied somehow, or they're abandoned somehow. There is a story that connects us to it. And we talked about this notion of doing landscape paintings and how it's kind of difficult because it's so potentially saccharine. Imagine painting old barns. It's like the worst possible thing you could ever choose to do, like hackneyed, dopey stuff. So how do you make it happen? How do you make it work? And I'm hoping to figure that out. This is my current studio with some work that's in process, and just sort of give you an idea of what it looks like. My etching press, paintings in progress, and then some completed paintings from my most recent show with, well, not most recent because I have one up right now, but the last show of paintings that I had at Elizabeth Leach in Portland. So this painting is 60 by 90 inches. This is in response to that driving back and forth. And my last statement on why East. I wanted to thank the Ford Family Foundation for funding my work for the past 2 years. I have to do that actually legally, but I want to do it now anyway, because it's great. And I think that's it. So I'm happy to respond to any questions that you might have, if you have any, or comments. Or not. Don't have to. Yeah.
This is kind of a mundane question, but when you're driving along these roads, what type of roads are they? Are you on the interstate?
I'm on the interstate mostly. Yeah. So in the past, when I was really, my time was more my own, when I was just a painter and not teaching a lot, I would actually go off on all these tangents and follow, roads that I wasn't sure were going to exist after a while, and get out of the car and walk and all that stuff. But now it's really, I have to get from A to B, and I have to find some way not to feel like I'm going insane in the car, wasting all my time driving. So I've come to the realization that that is studio time too. And that hour and a half of getting from Portland to Corvallis and back again is actually useful time. I'm doing research. I'm doing visual research. I haven't figured out how to write that off of my taxes yet, but I'm going to try that someday. It's not incidental time, something happens and I notice things, and I have found a strategy using some technology, just a telephone, to help me with that. Yeah. Yeah.
I noticed, especially your
At that time, no, there's no hidden agenda there. Those are simply the images that I showed you. So I have some, you're talking about the pencil drawings and those guys, yeah. I know I have some really terrific images of women as well. It was mostly, when I put this talk together, I had to scan some old slides and stuff, and you're at the mercy of what you have, you know, what you can find. That is something I would recommend that you all get used to, like taking care of documenting your work. If you're thinking of doing this, document it well, and then store it someplace like near each other so you can lay your hands on it again. It's a great question, though. Yeah.
Tell me about the Ford Family Foundation grant, and you know, like you talk about economics playing a part.
Right.
How have you grasped that as a painter?
Well, the Ford Family Foundation is an organization based in Roseburg, Oregon, and they started a program of fellowships to individual artists 4 years ago. It's for artists who are residents of the state and who have achieved a certain level of, you know, professional whatever, and exhibit potential to continue. It's a $25,000 fellowship with unrestricted funds. So basically, they give 3 of them a year. It's a pilot program right now. They're in the 5th year this year. This will be the last year of the program. So I received one of these in the 2nd year of its existence. I don't know how to tell you about it other than at that time, because I got that basically right after everything fell apart in terms of the economy and nobody was buying paintings. So my income got reduced by about 90%. And as an artist, that's a huge drop, you know. As anybody, that's a huge drop. So that fellowship actually kept me from losing my house and, you know, paid for food and, you know, the mortgage and all that stuff. It's not probably ideally what they intended it to be used for, though I have spoken with them about it and they have no problem with it, but I think they had a whole other idea of what, you know, this will liberate artists to quit their job for a year and you know, just focus on their work and all that stuff. That's not the reality, because we all have, you know, our lives to pay for. In fact, on the 28th of this month, I'm speaking in Portland to the board of the Ford Family Foundation. I've been invited to come down and talk to them about the realities of the impact of their fellowship on artists. So, does that answer your question? Okay.
How much of your time as an artist do you think you spend like applying for grants and looking for that other part that they don't talk about in art school?
So I personally haven't been that great at doing that. I haven't been a career kind of strategist. I simply have done the work. I have been very fortunate in that I've had galleries that represent me, and one in particular in Portland, the Elizabeth Leach Gallery. I've been with her for 26 years, and she's been lucky in finding people who are interested in owning my work. So I've actually made a living not through grants and fellowships, but by selling work, which is not that common among my colleagues. It's not like I'm making a whole ton of money, but I was able to make a living and not have to do not take a second job until, but I would always teach, but because I really love teaching. But now I have to teach, so I'm actually teaching at 3 different institutions in order to make everything work. You asked about grants and fellowships. I see it as a critical part of the process right now. I used to think that because I was making enough money off my work, I shouldn't apply for grants and fellowships because it takes it away from somebody who actually needs that money, who isn't as fortunate as me and is not selling, you know, maybe whose work is performative or whose work is, you know, it's not as attractive somehow. And I got really abraded, you know, really what's the word, upbraided by Christy Edmonds, who's the founder of the Portland Institute for Contemporary Art, who's now the head of performance at Los Angeles, UCLA. And she really laid into me for that way of thinking. She said, it's artists like me that should be applying for them, because it's not a handout, you know? It's not something, it's something that is the desire of the granting organizations is to support the best work, you know? Not to make sure that an artist who needs some food gets some food, you know what I mean? It's a weird way to think about it. I mean, my empathy thing says, well, I don't really need it, so I'm not going to apply so that my buddy can get it, you know? But the reality is, I'm shooting myself in the foot by not applying, you know? So I still am not quite clear on the balance of that. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah. Oh. Yeah.
I just had a question. It seemed like you've gone from staunchly kind of black and white monotypes to really vibrant color. Is that a conscious thing, or is it just something?
This is a totally conscious thing. I absolutely love color, and you can see, you know, it's evidenced in the work. When I work with black and white, I find that it lends itself to being much more a factual image. Not that it's more realistic, it's just that it feels to me like it's a statement as opposed to an opinion, you know, as opposed to a sort of a sending out a thought and getting response. So working with black ink on a white sheet of page, to me, makes the work that much more just, it exists more, you know? I don't know how to say it more directly than that. Fact versus fiction, I guess. Hold on, yeah?
I'm curious about your process of visual research that you explained a little bit about.
Yeah.
It seems mostly to be out in the world, just perceiving and painting and taking photographs. I'm wondering if there's an element of your creative process that's text-based. Do you do any reading or that kind of research?
Oh, I read constantly. I don't really read about artists or art. I mean, you know, I get the magazines and keep up to date on stuff, but the stuff that interests me, I'm reading right now Home Economics by Wendell Berry. I'm reading a book, Gerhard Richter's The Daily Practice of Painting is always at my bedside. I pick it up and read it over and over again. Anything by John Berger, I'm constantly buying copies and giving them away. But then I don't read a lot of fiction. I kind of read essays. I'm interested, recently I'm really loving, Flannery O'Connor's letters between she and other, you know, friends and other writers. So it's a book called The Habit of Being. Yeah. And you had a question?
I was wondering if you were actually trained as a printmaker, or if you kind of just learned on the job when you were up in Seattle.
So I went to the University of Wisconsin for my undergraduate and graduate degrees. I took printmaking as an undergraduate. I took etching, lithography, never did block printing. I never even heard about monotype. So I had some experience as a printmaker, but I didn't study it beyond that. And in graduate school, I did drawing. That was what I did. So in Seattle, and after that, I just taught myself about monotype. Yeah.
Can you talk about your process of underpaintings, and do you ever get attached to them? Does the underpainting ever become the painting?
Well, so far, I haven't had that happen where the underpainting just became the painting. Yes, I do find them really lovely, and yes, I do think it's really valuable to sacrifice those things that you love. You know, isn't there? There's this thing about "kill your darlings." You know that expression. You know. So one of the last paintings that I showed you was this single image of a little house in a field with some red stuff under it, and so that's probably the closest so far now. That's the underpainting has revealed a lot. There's a lot of bare canvas, you know. So in that painting, well, even though it has a really strong, I don't know if I can put it up there, even though it has a really strong sense of the structure of the image, that kind of stuff, that's not a touch screen, is it? Come on. So that painting, you can see that all of this stuff, that business there, all of that red stuff is all part of the initial structure of the painting, just the underpainting. All of this up here is just gesso. You know, it's just bare canvas that's been primed. And I use rags and stuff to move stuff around, so it might have a little bit of staining on it, but you know, that's as opposed to something like this one, which, you know, every inch of the canvas has paint on it. But you can see, well, I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else? Yeah, sure.
So when I was saying that it seems that, first of all, oil painting is something that, in some ways, it's a position that you have to kind of defend, right, in its tradition, or you have to be really aware of the weight of the tradition of painting right now, especially oil size painting. If you're sort of in the critical
Easel size painting.
Easel size
Yeah.
painting, what I
Yeah.
say.
Yeah. I think you said oil size, so but
Oil
yes,
size painting.
small handheld stuff.
Right, and
Yeah.
then the idea of the sort of conventional subject, so the
Mhm.
nude, the portrait, the landscape comes from the Renaissance. Old sort of conventional subject
Right.
matter is also something that is not, I mean, it's certainly, you know, important. It feeds us in terms of being a subject, but it does, in my sort of thinking, ask us to make sense of why are we doing it now, and especially pastoral landscapes when we're living, you know, so much, you know, 100 and so years after the first plein air painters were going out and fleeing from and refusing a kind of modernity that was coming in. And so I'm wondering, do you feel pressure to kind of ask yourself those questions or address that? Not because they're saccharine so much, but because of what about sort of what is in the subject besides just the painting?
Well, I mean, I could put it back on you. Why am I standing here talking about the work? What interested you? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I feel that rather than me worrying about what other people think about my choice of subject or the materials that I use and all that stuff, what's critical for me is to engage honestly and authentically with doing the work. And if I do that, I have a better chance of finding something that's unique, you know, even if it's a degree away from something which has been seen 100 times.
Yeah.
It will show itself. It'll be revealed. And, you know, the key there is authenticity. The key is not taking into consideration what somebody else is going to think about it. You know what I mean?
But there is a place where you would situate yourself in relation to other artists of your time, right?
Sure.
So what about, James Lavador's in
Okay.
Prairie, what about other artists, like Wolf Kahn?
Sure. It's funny you
Right?
say that, yeah.
So like what other, so how would you, and I think about Eric Fischl or Lucian Freud rather than someone like John Curran in terms of oil painting and sort of realism or kind of.
Right. So I mean, you just mentioned Wolf Kahn. I was just in a meeting that I was telling you about earlier. At this interview, they were saying, "Well, your work is kind of like Wolf Kahn and Joan Mitchell put together," and I wasn't sure what they were trying to say, but what I was hearing was like, "Well, shit, who could complain about being compared to Wolf Kahn and Joan Mitchell?" You know, so it's. You know, there's no secret that I pay attention to the work of other artists, that I'm moved by it, that I steal things from it. You know, like a Joan Mitchell painting – moves me because of just the muscularity of how she moved paint around, you know, and I love it. And so I do that, you know, I got permission from her to do that, or a Jackson Pollock painting, or I mentioned Richard Diebenkorn earlier. He was a huge influence for a while. But it's not like I want my work to look like theirs. You know what I mean? It's just so I'm very Catholic. I mean, I mentioned being Catholic with a big C earlier, but now I'm a little C Catholic. I love the work of a lot of different artists. Richard Serra just blows me away. You know, you look at my work and you won't know that. It doesn't make anything that looks like Richard Serra, but there's a quality to his work which is so powerful. Why not just, you know, embrace that? And the oil painting thing, you know, I don't think it's a dead medium, honestly. I think that whatever medium one chooses to work in, if you engage in it with, you know, you're supposed to be engaged with it, whether you're working with video or making sculpture or painting or taking photographs. If it's what you're supposed to be doing, you'll do it. And if you do it with authenticity, it's of the time. It is what you're doing. It's contemporary, you know? I mean, I look at a painter like Dana Schutz and or Elizabeth Peyton, and I still haven't figured out, do those painters feel to me like painters who are engaged with it authentically, or have they found a gimmick? You know what I mean? I don't know yet. Yeah.
You mentioned being raised Catholic, and so I'm curious, without trying to influence what you're going to say, does that play a role in the way you interpret your subjects, or just how you make your art? I guess you feel any Catholic guilt. Is that something you deal with on a daily basis anymore?
It's no, it's not something I deal with on a daily basis, but I think that I guess I mentioned it because it is something that formed me, who I am, and I had actively left it, you know what I mean? But all the impact, all the exposure to art and exposure to critical thinking. I mean, one of the things that was a weird, what's the word? Dichotomy? That's not really the word. Things that oppose one another. You would think you would be told exactly what to think. But I was taught to question. So, you know, I'm asked to believe and I'm taught to question. I love that, you know, and I questioned and I came up with an answer which didn't keep me in that place of belief, you know. And I think that's a lot like being an artist. You have to look, you have to be critical, you have to question, you have to reject, you have to accept and reject. I mean, I always tell my students one of the skills that I hope they get when they leave our program is the ability to be critical and without destroying their psyche, being critical enough of the work that they can accept or reject honestly what they're doing. They don't have to ask me, is this any good? They tell me, look at this. I did this. And they're not looking for my judgment on it, you know what I mean? They already know what they think about it and where it stands. Anybody else up there? No? Okay. I think we're done.
Thank you.
Thank you.